Okay, Kurt, quick question. When's the last time somebody asked you who you are? And follow up to that, did you actually have a real answer to it?
You ask me that all the time, Tim. Like, who are you, Kurt? Kurt, who the hell are you?
Who am I in relationship to who you are? Who are we?
Who are we? So, I mean, people, that's not a question that I think we often get asked, right? And I think it's even harder when you think about the answer. So, because glibly, I could answer, I'm a behavioral scientist, or I'm the president of the Lantern Group. And, then it's, but I'm also a dad of two. I'm a spouse to Aaron. I am, all of these different things. And so what is the actual answer? Yeah. And is there underneath all of that one answer that I can put in a nice little box that I can say, here you go, here is who Kurt is? And I think that's a really difficult thing to ask. And it's a really difficult thing for us to really know about ourselves. I think it's one of the hardest things, in fact, for us to know is like, who am I?
Yeah. And it doesn't always have to be like a super philosophical answer, but I do think that most of us would stall out on this. Right?
True.
Because it's hard. And our guest today says that it's not just a personal failing, it's actually a predictable result of how we've spent the last 20 years online.
Yeah. So our guest's name is Patricia Martin, and she is a cultural researcher who spent the last 3 decades studying identity and digital culture. And her new book is called Will the Future Like You? Which is a great question. I don't know. Will the future like me? I don't know. But she started this work after a call from a NASA-affiliated engineer who wanted to get help getting young people, kids, excited about space again. He realized kids aren't excited about space. And he told her, I don't know if we're ambitious like that anymore. And that question sent her on this decade-long search, one that turned into research on strangers. And eventually, she even turned that research on herself.
Yeah, she talked to tattoo artists. She talked to a radical priest who heard confessions in prisons, therapists, analysts, cultural theorists. And she went through her own version of it too, like divorce, loss, a business that fell apart. She woke up one day and genuinely couldn't answer the question, who am I?
And here's the big thing that we want you to take away from this episode. What she found is something that she calls a persona fog. She identified this idea of a persona fog, and she's got this line that I think stopped both of us cold. And it's this: the internet has made the self a consumer commodity, and social media is the supply chain.
Ooh.
The internet has made the self a consumer commodity, and social media is the supply chain. I mean, that's yikes and scary and all sorts of other things. Yeah.
But that said, this is not a doom and gloom episode. Patricia's big takeaway, her answer isn't to unplug and disappear. She makes the case that the fix is in construction, not subtraction. She'll walk us through a few conversations that she's had, and I think that they'll leave you feeling inspired.
I don't know. I think I would just like to unplug and disappear. But yeah.
Be strong. Be strong.
Be strong. I will be strong here. All right.
It's not just willpower, by the way. It's focus.
All right. So everyone, please sit back and relax with a fresh pour of something that helps you remember exactly who you are. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that's that Bud Light that I haven't had in 35 years or whatever it is. So there you go. And before you open a single app today, please sit down and enjoy our conversation with Patricia Martin.
Patricia Martin, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you here, and we're going to kick off with our infamous speed round with the first question, maybe the most important question the whole time that we spend together today, and that is, would you prefer to learn a new instrument or a new language?
Language.
No. Do you have a language in mind?
Well, my Spanish is rusty and my Italian is dying to be formed.
Okay. I love that. I love that. It's like I have a friend who says, like when someone says, "Well, didn't you say that?" And he's like, and rather than saying, "I don't remember saying that," he says, "I can almost remember that." That's a great way of thinking about it. Yeah. Okay.
All right. So you said you listened to a couple episodes before, so you probably can guess the next question already. Are you a coffee drinker or a tea drinker, or is there some other drink of choice for you?
Ooh, I swing both ways. Coffee in the morning, tea in the evening.
Yeah. So this is a common thing when people say, "Oh, I do both." I have never heard of anybody going tea in the morning and coffee in the evening.
Nobody says that.
Nobody.
Yeah. Well, I was raised by a mother who was an immigrant from Ireland, and she drank tea, of course.
Yeah.
To the end of her days, and we always laughed that it was tea, but a spoon would stand up in it. You know, it was no joke.
Strong, right?
Yeah.
There you go. Yes,
wow.
Okay.
So I'm just making a little a checklist of things that I want to spend another hour with you on. And the first was just Jungian psychology. The second one, now you just added with an immigrant family from Ireland. So since that's where my ancestors are from. Okay. Third speed round question. Aristotle famously repeated the Oracle of Delphi's command to know thyself. Is it easier today or harder today than it was 2,300 years ago to accomplish that?
It is catastrophically harder.
Oh. Okay. Ow.
We'll dig into that. As Tim was saying, there's things that we want to talk about. All right. Last of our infamous, as Tim mentioned, speed round questions. Are we harnessing technology, or is technology harnessing us?
It depends on how conscious you are.
Ooh.
Nice. Okay. We're going to come back to that. But I want to start by talking about, we are talking with Patricia about her new book, Will the Future Like You? And you start the book by saying that you're going to help the reader address how to answer this question, who am I? And I'm wondering, this is a decades-long project for you. To what degree did at least start as sort of a me search project?
Well, it didn't start as a me search project. It became a me search project. And I admit that in the book, because even though that created insecurity for me, because I'm a cultural researcher, I'm an independent researcher, but I hold myself to social science standards. And so the me is always your gaze as the researcher is important. And, whatever you bring that gaze to is read through the filter of your own preferences and your own psychology. That being said, it's not considered a professional academic standard to, include memoir material, but this is how it worked for me. I started this research. I got a call. I was running a research agency. So I get this call from a gentleman, an engineer who was affiliated with NASA, and he was wanting to figure out how to reach millennials and younger generations to make them interested in space travel.
Yeah.
And I asked him the question, because usually the client actually knows the answer already. And so, could I be helpful? And I said, well, what do you think the problem is? And he said, I don't know if we're ambitious like that anymore in this country. I don't know if that's who we are. And that thought that this was that ambition, that the will to become was something collectively felt, and, what was underneath that. And so I started poking around into identity formation and what was changing. And I've always been attuned to the digital culture. And so, and then as I'm researching this, I had a series of personal events that kind of shattered my own sense of self. So, I lost my mother. I went through an amicable but, difficult divorce, 2 children. I ended up having to move them 3 times in 2 years to get them in the right school system. And, and then I lost a big project that was like the bloodstream to my agency and had to lay off people. And then I woke up one day and didn't know who I was and couldn't answer that question. Who am I? And that is when I began to really, I think to myself, I lit out like Huck Finn. Yeah. And I had my notebook and I crisscrossed the country and I searched out as many experts as I could. And then I also moved to the fringes. I talked to tattoo artists and a radical priest who heard confessions in prisons. And, I talked to people who listened to the yearnings of other people to say, this is who I really am, and I want to get there. And that included therapists, psychotherapists, analysts, counselors. And of course, I chewed through academic research, by the gigabyte. And then I embarked on my own research that, in other words, this was research unique to me by harnessing an early form of AI to scrape the web and find out, get the pulse of where people were at with their sense of self. And that's what went into the research. And I wove it with my own story to just say, what does it mean, to answer the question, what does it mean to build or rebuild your sense of self in the digital age? And that's what I sought to find out.
All right. I might be asking these out of order as we're thinking about this, but I want to jump back into Tim's speed round question, which is it easier or harder than it was 2,300 years ago to know thyself? And you were saying it's much harder today. And I'm saying I might jump ahead because we might need to know how to understand ourselves before we get into why it's harder or easier today. But let's dig into, from your perspective, what are those factors that make it harder? I mean, isn't ourself is ourself? Shouldn't we just be able to do some introspection and we should be able to find out who we are?
Here's the system of the down in terms of how the internet has been structured.
Yeah.
So a couple things. First of all, let me just explain how we develop a sense of self. And,
Perfect.
This can be debated, but this was the universal understanding. And that is that it is a 3-legged stool. So you have, how you see yourself, how other people see you, and then your will to become. And so structurally, this is what has happened with the internet, is that how you see yourself and how other people see you have become the same thing. We have outsourced our sense of self to the algorithm and to the crowd. And the third is, I think, the most important to consider, especially as we move into this age of AI expansion, is that the internet has been coded to reduce the sense of human will. And a former strategist at Google, who's now in the philosophy department at Oxford University, even said this, James Williams, is that the search engine had been coded to reduce the sense of human will. And that reduction, piece by piece, search by search, posting by posting, that reduces our agency to define ourselves, is not something I'm thinking, existed in the age of Socrates and Plato.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we weren't fighting that battle,
Right.
basically. Yeah.
Well, we weren't fighting that battle. And the other thing, you were fighting battles. You were being taken as a slave. You were being asked to, convert your sense of geography and nationality. Those things are true. However, it was pretty obvious when you were being conquered and what the consequences of that would be. And what I'm talking about now is, for the large part, unseen. It's felt, the psyche feels it, and that's what gives people symptoms they feel but can't pin down. And those are described in my book. But by and large, this is pretty subterranean for people.
Yeah. It reminds me, and I wrote down this quote because I love that when you're talking about identity, that you didn't go to the easy self-help. Oh, identity is just these three things. And if you just do those three things, then bada bing, bada boom, you got magic identity. You talked about it as an active, creative energy that we possess that helps us adapt as human beings, that it isn't this static thing, that I love the idea of thinking about identity as something that helps us adapt. That was just like kind of a big boom inside my head when I read that.
Yeah,
I guess there isn't a question there. I'm pulling a Kurt.
No, but it gives me an opportunity to kind of inject something that is also happening in cyberspace right now. There has been a rise of an understanding about the self, which is actually very convenient for the people who make money on the platforms that people post on. And it goes something like this. This starts with Lacan, the French psychiatrist, and it got picked up by Zizek, who is this, philosophical rock star on the internet. This idea that the self is a construct, that there really is no self. It is all performance. And that has been convenient because then you're not going to miss anything. You're not going to feel the absence of something. And that has also set people up. This is very popular thinking right now. And if it's all performance, because I have studied Carl Jung's work, he believed that our sense of self is very dynamic, but it has a core. It has a seedling. Just as, if you're a gardener, you've been planting seeds, maybe this spring and summer. And, if you're planting a gardenia seed, you're going to get a gardenia because that's what's at its core. And it might flourish in different ways, right? But so this idea that there is no sense of self really positions us for when AI becomes not only expanded in our lives, but it starts to generate consequences that we couldn't anticipate. That will be a highly destructive way to think about who you are. And I clocked the stories of people who were suffering from things like chronic self-doubt, people who lost any inner navigational system because of what I call persona fog. And that is, they had generated so many personas spread them across platforms. And then a second thing happened. They began to invest in those personas as if they were a self. And it spins up this it obscures the core self. And then it's very hard to do things like create a coherent story of who you are and create a coherent story of the future for yourself.
So you just talked about this idea of persona fog, and you lay out the book kind of around three of these disruptive forces to self. And that persona fog is the first one that you talk about. Can you talk about how you lay the book out and what those other two disruptive forces are?
Sure. So we've talked about persona fog, and we'll thread through that, I'm sure, throughout our conversation.
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll get in deeper. Yeah.
But Kurt, the destructive power of self-doubt is, we all have episodic self-doubt, right? Am I going to get the job? Am I going to get the date? Am I going to get the house? Are things going to work out for me? But what I was discovering in talking to people across 10 years is that this was a daily downbeat. They had lost that sense of inner knowing, that, they had some greater purpose. They had some raison d'etre, that they, that they were constituted to be a certain kind of person. And so there was this sort of vanillaizing of, how they saw themselves, as if to remain so pliable that the next persona could arrive and, meet the moment for the audience that they were cultivating. And this creates a lot of self-doubt. And, over time, it's not only exhausting, it's destructive, because you can't create anything out of that. You can't build anything new or different for yourself. And this is where things like stuckness come from.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that was a big meme, and that meme never died for 10 years. I followed that meme of stuckness, and it never abated. So it's interesting that it never lost its traction. And then the final thing, and this is, I think, going to be exacerbated by the arrival, and it's already here, but the expansion of AI, and that is cascading crossroads. So how we define ourselves, our roles we play, parent, worker, professional, these confer a lot of identity. And when you get the rug pulled out from under you, then you're not only asking the question, what do I do? You're asking the question, who am I? And so I have seen over the past 20 years, people are switching careers, not just jobs. People are making 5 to 7 career changes. That was unheard of 2 decades ago, because people have to upskill, change, pivot in order to just meet the family nut. And these require a lot of recruitment of a sense of self in order to meet the moment of that. And so if we can imagine how much collateral crossroads we're going to face as entire industries are disrupted, as entire career paths, even now, I mean, when you follow the situation in higher ed, you've got incoming students who aren't really sure if they even want to be there because it doesn't seem to make sense. It's not preparing them for anything. And you've got the institution saying, what do we do? What do we do now? Like, the whole system of it seems to be thrown into question. There's a perfect example of something being interrupted.
Hey, this is Kurt, and we want to say thanks for listening to Behavioral Grooves. And we hope that you're enjoying this episode, but it feels a little bit one-sided. You're hearing from us, but we're not hearing from you.
This is Tim, and we have 2 suggestions to remedy that. The first is join our Facebook page and engage with us.
We want to talk with you. We want to hear your perspectives, and hopefully our Facebook page might be the place to have some of that interaction. So please come and join us.
The other recommendation we have for you is to leave us a quick rating. You know, the little 5-star thing at the bottom of your app? Or a short review. Just leave us a few words about what you like about behavioral groups. We'd very much appreciate it.
Thanks, and we now return you to our regularly scheduled programming.
Yeah. Help our listeners differentiate between the differences in these personas and the differences in the way, I like to go out and play music. So when I show up on a stage, I'm a musician. People see me as a musician, and I've got a performative aspect about it. And then I've got a business meeting the next day, and I'm showing up in a particular way. How is that different than this rather destructive side of the personas that you're talking about?
So, Tim, the difference is that, first of all, from everything you're describing, the way you're using persona is classic, and it's what it's intended for.
Okay.
So it's
great.
like,
so okay, good.
Good job.
Yes. Yeah.
It's if I were to apply a tech terminology to what the persona does for the psyche, for the self, is it's the GUI interface between you and the external world. It's the social side of us.
Yeah.
And it's also, by the way, and this, persona is a theory of Carl Jung's. He, in his map of the soul, he saw the persona as the thinnest layer of the psyche, which also means that it's pretty fragile. It's never been intended for the load bearing that we've placed on it with the digital culture. And so it's no wonder people are talking about fragility. It's no wonder people are talking about breakdowns, because they're trying to move a piano on a skateboard, and it's, you know what I mean? The wheels are falling off. And so, I say that with a chuckle in my voice, but, it has some pretty serious consequences. So what the big thing is that I want your listeners to understand is, number one, when you invest too much identity into those personas, it has a steep consequences for you, and you might not be aware of that. And I can give you a couple of examples in a minute, but I want to jump over to this second thing, is that our personas also, if they are leaned into too heavily, they also can create a fracturing.
Yeah, like how? How's that happen?
So part of that fracturing is also part of the strange system that we live in now. So if you can imagine, like, let's say you're an influencer, you're making your monthly nut, you're paying your mortgage by how many eyeballs you attract.
Yep.
Right? And you've got 2 million on one day, and you wake up and the algorithm has been reset, and you've got 1,000, and you don't even know and you've even lost your subscribers, and there's no rhyme or reason to this. That begins a fracturing.
Yeah.
The other thing that begins a fracturing is you identify more and more with it, is that you, and this goes back to persona fog, you atrophy the parts of you that can reach the deeper core self. And I'll give you a specific example. I had this woman I followed her for a few years. I had her on my podcast. And part of the reason I'm going to tell this story, Tim, is that when I had her on Jung in the World, she said she wanted to come on because she wanted to help anybody else who might be going through this. This is a woman who built a massive audience, nearly 3 million. She was cheeky. She talked about the art world and creative people, and she kind of gave it a send up, and she revealed what went behind the scenes. And to do this, she created a persona. And the persona was a blend of, because she was in the art space, Jerry Gagosian, which was, and she pretended to be like like a niece of, Gagosian has one of the most influential galleries in New York City. Yeah. And so
a master curator.
Yeah. And so he was a kingmaker, and so she does this sort of tongue-in-cheek thing. Her audience grows, and for 7 years, nobody would call her born name, Hildy Helfenstein. She was just Jerry Gagosian everywhere she went, even if she corrected people. So she just stopped correcting people. Wow. So she's living in this persona for 7 years, traveling the world, going to art events. And then in that 7th year, things started to break down, and she ended up in the psych ward. And this is an important lesson. And I feel myself getting a little emotional about this, because I was going to write a Substack post, like following up on some of the people that I've talked to. And I found her obituary.
No.
She didn't make it. And those are really high stakes. And I remember when she was on the podcast, she was wanting to tell me that she had decided that she was going to leave Jerry Gagosian behind and be herself, and she was triumphant about this. But the hard thing to do, and this is what I want people to understand, is that when we, all the memes around this, like how do we get ourselves back online? How do we get our true selves back online? How do we get our consciousness back online, our focus, our attention?
Not back on the internet. Not
but
online.
Back, like rooted in the self. In
connecting
the
our own system to ourselves.
Yeah. Yes.
Our own operating system. Yeah.
Our own operating system. Our native operating system that makes us human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's all about subtraction, which opens a void. Nature hates a void. And if you're already suffering persona fog, which Hildy confessed she was, but she didn't have a name for it. What happens is if you don't consciously begin to do the things that create a sense of identity, this is where you get lost. This is where the undertow begins.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting when you bring that up. It's in my head, I immediately go to, so that persona, did that become the reality and then trying to leave it? Did that not? And there's a million of other questions that could come out of that. But I think there's a larger picture to that, which is, what the internet is doing to us in those situations. And you wrote a really, love this line. It's clever and darkly intriguing. It's, the internet has made the self a consumer commodity, and the internet is the supply chain.
Yes. Social media is the supply chain.
Yeah. So help us understand dig into
Sounds
that
scary.
a little bit, and how do we, so how does that impact us, and what does that mean for us as humans who, have to live in the real world?
Those are big questions, Kurt.
we only go for those easy to answer.
I love you guys. You can
things.
swim in the deep end.
That's right. Exactly.
Let's do a couple laps in that pool.
Yes.
Part of the pool.
Yes.
Let's get out of the kiddie pool and dive in the deep end. Here we go.
That's right. Yeah.
So wading into that is that, first of all, I don't think people really see that for what it is. We don't own the platforms.
Right.
We perform on the platforms.
Yeah.
And I believe, because I study and research culture, I've done that for 30 years, I see how important this shift is. That historically, the sense of self, the core self, has never been what's up for sale in the way that it is now. And so outsourced and commodified. And so, as I look across 20th century literature, that was about the search for self.
Mm-hmm.
And the 21st century is about the performance of the self. And those are two very different things.
And is the catalyst for that, do you think the internet is the fulcrum on which this whole thing teeters?
I think that the internet has been exploitative and opportunistic. It's a business. It's not a social service.
No, and the goods of sales that we were sold at the beginning are not actually even being sold today, are not there. There was a recent thing, like the social part of social media is really a misnomer. I mean, the number of people that we actually know in person that we're connecting with on any of those major platforms is under 10%, I think, in what I saw, right? So 90+% are people we don't know, influencers, corporations, others who are out there that we're being fed. And that's an interesting piece. It's not, I'm getting out, I'm hanging out with my friends. It's just electronically. This is now, as you said, it's a commodity that we're trying to sell who we are. So,
well, and the toothpaste is out of the tube, right? We're not going to push the toothpaste back into the tube when it comes to the number of people who are relying on social media to broadcast their humble brags about their, oh my gosh, it was so hot when we were in Singapore. Oh man, it was just brutal. But we got through. And here's the fantastic 48 pictures that we took on our first day of our 6-week trip in Singapore and all this kind of stuff. That performative aspect, it's hard for me to imagine that going away. So so you talked about subtraction. Patricia, how do we start to think about subtracting some of this to get back to getting our systems online with ourselves?
So I understand subtraction. I think it's very hard for parents right now to execute that with their kids realistically. I have all the sympathy in the world for that. But I would like to reframe this as construction. How do we use the tools to our benefit to construct a sense of self that we can believe in and to construct a coherent story of the self? And by the way, this idea of the construction of a coherent story of the self, it reaches across psychiatry, psychoanalysis, into the social sciences. You know, when people can tell themselves a coherent story about who they are, this is important. And so how do we use the tools? Well, my favorite case study is Janet. She was a teenager when I discovered her, when I was recruiting people into the study. And she studied STEM. She was really talented. She was brilliant. And she was on every single platform, on top of which she had, I can't even remember how many different avatars she had in online, massively, MMOGs, massively online games. So she was everywhere. And she had to go to college. And so she had to write an personal essay about herself. And it was a reckoning. It was a crossroads for her, because what she realized is she drew a blank. She didn't know how to tell a story of herself. And so it surprised her in a way that made her become what I call the editor-in-chief of the content of who she is. And so she went through every single platform that she was on, and she looked at content that she had suppressed because it didn't attract audiences. And she was like, is that still me? And if she still believed in that part of her and that was valuable, that had meaning in her life, she kept that voice or she kept that content, even though it had no audience. And for stuff that was really high performing, she saw the seduction in it. And if it didn't matter to her anymore, she stopped tweeting about it, or she stopped, you know what I mean? She dropped that persona. And so she edited it down and she wrote this, what I call a sovereign paragraph about herself, saying, this is who I am. And from that, she wrote the essay, and she got into a very prestigious college for a full ride. And she said to me, I don't think I could have ever done this if I didn't take the tools in my own hands and use them for my own good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right, Patricia, you talked about some of the people that you interviewed, the different, like the radical priests and some of the others. Tell our listeners, like some of the just some, maybe a story or two from any of them that you think is illustrative of some of the insights that you gain from them? Because you picked them for a reason, right? I mean, it wasn't just random out there. You picked them because they had a special kind of insight into the psyche of people.
Well, I can tell you what the tattoo artist told me.
Perfect.
She said, everyone wants you to get their name right.
That's
And when I learned that, it's a very simple thing, right? Identity is important to people. And getting their name right matters. And remembering it. And so I apply that to, this is one of my, I think, very pivotal interviews that I had. It happened a couple years before he died, and that was with Mike Csikszentmihalyi, who was famous for his theory of flow, which is about peak performance. And his name is about 3 inches long, and I think it has one vowel. And I say that with all reverence. And I had a friend who studied with him when he was at the University of Chicago, and I called her up because I had already talked to the tattoo artist, and I got to get his name right. And so I rehearsed his name, and I'll never forget walking in to meet him and saying, "Thank you so much, Professor Csikszentmihalyi." And he lit up. I like the doors opened, and because he told me I only have 15 minutes, and I think we talked for an hour and a half. So anyway, here's the thing that Csikszentmihalyi said that I think is so important, is that there are two kinds of consciousness. One is attention, and the other is transcendent. And the problem that people don't understand is there's a relationship between the two. And that if you suffer from an attention disorder, or you cannot focus your attention for any reason, you lose the ability for the second. And I don't think people understand. They think that their consciousness is infinite. And I think what he taught me is consciousness is a resource, but it isn't infinite. And we disable that second level of transcendent consciousness, which a lot of people say they want, when we dribble it out drop by drop online.
I love listening to you, Patricia, because it reminds me of reading the book where you just drop all these bombs of fantastic lines, and it's just really a joy.
Thank you.
I just want to say that. Kurt, I'm getting itchy. Do you mind if
I knew this was going to show up here pretty soon. So,
but after 500 some episodes, Kurt can read me well enough. But Patricia, I do want to make a slight left turn here in the conversation and ask you about your musical preferences. And this is going to come in the form of, if you were to spend a year on a desert island and you had a music listening device that only had 2 artists on it. Now, you get everything that they've ever recorded, but you only get 2. And by the way, this isn't a go to your grave question. This is just right now at 12:52 p.m. Eastern time. What 2 artists would you take with you?
Okay. All right. Can you see I'm stammering? And I've thought about this before.
Well, we were talking about
I
it before.
prepared for you guys.
And we were even talking about music before we started recording. So
yes, and I grew up in Detroit.
Oh,
that is, a gold mine of musical talent, right? And so that's in my listening DNA. But it's also, Detroiters have a great sense of identity that they wrap around their music. And so, of course, if I weren't on a desert island, or let's say Gilligan's Island, and there was a hut and I lived in it and it had a kitchen, I would be blaring Aretha Franklin. And in the basement, I would be playing Eminem.
Okay.
All right. Okay. But
And if
Since
it had a
you're not
garage, it would be Jack White.
Okay.
I'm just saying.
You are
hedging,
just
I'm
getting
hedging.
the entire Detroit component, or you're
That's
doing
right.
a little love fest for Detroit music here. So yeah.
Okay, but you're not on Gilligan's Island. I'm going to come back. These are the rules.
Oh,
Rules are rules.
No, they're not, Tim.
Yeah.
We've had many people break the rules in this little experiment
Tim.
that we've done.
I don't identify with those rules.
Snap! I love it.
Fantastic.
All right. So you're sticking with the Detroit theme because you said you're stammering and you had thought about this. Did you have two others before you came on, and now you've switched?
Well, you know what? I did this whole thing. I used to go to Pitchfork every year in Chicago, and sadly it ended. All good things come to an end, I guess. And I just love that indie vibe. Mm-hmm. And, you can hardly call like Slater Kinney, new and edgy, but I started there. I was like, I want me some Slater Kinney, and
yeah.
But I'm sticking with, if I had one sound that I could listen to, it would be Aretha.
Okay.
The Queen of Soul. Yeah.
Well, and I like that you paired that right away with Eminem, and then you went to Jack White. You got like the genres that you went to are like disparate when it comes to that musical part, but
the variety-seeking self, right?
But there's
the
a feeling,
variety-seeking self.
But there's something. So all three of those, I think, have a Detroit mentality. And maybe I'm just I didn't even think about that until you said it. It's like they were groundbreaking. They didn't follow a convention. They kind of took things in their own way.
And they continue to. So one of the things, this is like boots on the ground feedback of that, for that question that you just posed to me, Kurt, is in our will to define ourselves. Jack White and Eminem are perfect examples of how they have become Renaissance leaders in Detroit to rebuild it. And you don't think of musicians playing that role, and yet they have stepped up. They've bought property. They've renovated old buildings. Jack White has a vinyl press that you can tour. He bought an entire block that was decayed and rebuilt it. Eminem has his own story of how he's helping other artists move up the chain and, building an ecosystem of new music in Detroit, brick by brick. And this is something that I think is revolutionary in our moment, when we are really kind of bombarded with stories about destruction.
Yeah.
And you've got these artists who are stepping up, and they're in the construction business. And I just think that's a great opportunity for other artists, whatever their discipline is to take on new roles. And just as you were talking about, Tim, you've got various personas, and that's healthy. This is what Jung meant by identity can be a creative force. And this is what our country needs right now.
So can I tie it back to the very first thing that you talked about, this idea of the NASA, talking about the start of this, right? And he was saying, I don't know if we have that will anymore. I paraphrased that wrong. What do you think? I mean, given what you just said about Jack White and Eminem, are there pockets of that will? Is there that communal desire to just do this, or have we lost it?
I think it's being redirected. And, this is where you're seeing a renaissance among young people for the Stoics. And why is that? Because, these were philosophers who highly, highly corrupt Roman society and leadership. And they were educated. Epictetus was made a slave after being part of a ruling class elsewhere. And so much of the control of the gears were out of their control. And what are you going to do? You turn to the self, and you turn to the community that, reinforces and supports the self. And that's what I think you're going to see. I think people are going to take back their communities. And so the national story is going to come not from a big proclamation out of Washington. It's going to come from the ground up, from the grassroots. And that's where people can have the biggest impact.
Patricia Martin, thank you for being a guest on Behavioral Grooves today.
It was my pleasure. You two are fabulous.
Welcome to our grooving session, where Tim and I share ideas on what we learned from our discussion with Patricia, have a free-flowing conversation, and groove on whatever else comes into our foggy brains.
Oh, yes. It's easy to get fogged up.
We've got a
lot of stuff going on. We've got a lot of online personas. We've got a lot of, we've got how we show up in all these different aspects of our life. I think it can get foggy. It absolutely can.
This is an interesting part. I think, she's absolutely right about all of the different ways that we're putting ourselves out there and the different ways that people see us. I'm just thinking about the number of accounts that I have and the different subgroups that I'm a part of online, mostly for work, but other, just personal ones. And I know I show up similar across them, but I'm also different in each one. And I know that I'm viewed differently in each one. So that other side of the three-legged stool that she talks about, right? This, how you see yourself, but how others see you. I think that is the part where particularly on social media, others see us very differently based upon their connection with us.
And we're outsourcing. We're, outsourcing the internet to sort of take us up on that, to figure it out. And I like her idea that the best thing for us to do is to become editor-in-chief of our own life.
Of our own story. Yeah.
Of our own story. Yeah. To write our own story and to be really intentional about it. And I think intentionality is something that you and I have talked about a lot over the years, that I still feel like it's kind of missing and it's hard to do.
It is hard to do.
I think that we're doing it well enough. We could do it better.
I think we can do it a lot better. I think, so the question you asked at the very beginning of this, the whole episode, right? Where it's like, Kurt, who are you? And we don't ask ourselves that question enough. I don't think we think about that almost at all.
Yeah.
To really sit down and ponder that. We do a lot of work with goal setting and various different things. We have modules. We have this goal shift module. We use it in a bunch of these brain shift and other, journals about getting goals. And one of the things that we know from the research, but also our own work, is that when you set big goals, they have to align with your core person. In other words, who you are.
Right.
And we don't do that. And people don't do that. They set these things because, this is what my parents want. This is what, society is looking for. This are all these things are not really there. And it's hard. It's hard to understand our core values. It's hard to understand what drives us. It's hard to understand what it is that kernel that is at the center of everything else that we present. And I think just spending time on identifying that and thinking about that. And as I said, it's not easy to package in a nice, clean little container. And it's like, here's who I am. And I also think it's shifting, but we can talk about that later. So
that's a great observation, Kurt. And it makes me think about our discussions about Aristotle and the know thyself kind of stuff. And I think about how we're not fixed entities. Like we're not carved in stone, because our life keeps changing. Now, Patricia talked about, like, her idea is that the fix is construction and not subtraction. It's not about just like, oh, I'm just going to log off. I'm just not going to participate. But it's about, being intentional, figuring out how it is I want to show up in the world, makes a difference. But I think part of it also is dealing honestly and positively with the idea that ourselves continue to evolve and to change as we get older. Like you said, in the introduction, I think you said something about, well, you could say I'm a dad of two. I'm a business owner. I'm a behavioral science agency owner. Like, there's all these things that you could say that you do. You're the president of the Rotary Club. Okay, so those things are going to change and evolve to some degree, and that's okay. But I think Patricia's message is still important. Like, if we're still going to be the editor in chief of our own story, we have to kind of come back in control of, where's the story going now? What's the next chapter like?
I think there's an interesting piece that you just talked about there, that is all of those different pieces, right? And it's not that they just evolve over time, and that I wasn't a dad, and then I was a dad, and then I was a dad of two, and different things, and I wasn't married, and now I am married, and all of those evolve, but they're also there at the same time, right? I am the multitude of those pieces, and there is something from each of those that is part of my core self. And that, I think, is really one of the difficult things of this is, how do you construct that? How do you emphasize those parts of you that are core, while not degrading those other parts that are important?
What did you say in a recent episode that, and I know that we've talked about this in other situations, but friction is where the learning takes place, I think you said. And maybe that's a way to think about, how do we know who we are at any given time? There has to be some experience in the world. We have to just go out and do it. Right? You can't just imagine rubbing two sticks together. You have to actually rub two sticks together. You have to see what that actually produces and how it feels.
That is, yes. And I'm getting this kind of like far off gaze, because I'm thinking of some other conversations that we've had where, kids are not necessarily going out and doing the things that we used to do, right? They're not dating as much in high school and college. They're not going out and drinking as much. They're not having these social interactions and different pieces. They don't have roommates. They don't live, at least if they even have roommates, they definitely don't share a bedroom, right? They have solitary bedrooms and different things. There's a whole bunch of those facets that are rubbing the sticks together.
That's right.
And they're living more and more of their life online, which I guess it's rubbing sticks, but it's really tiny, skinny sticks that tiny, like the little tiny branches at the end of the branch. They're not the big sticks that are going to start a fire. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but yeah.
Okay. Anything else that you want to add to this discussion with your wisdom this morning?
I just wanted to go back. Patricia talked about Janet's story, that talented teenager spread across dozens of platforms and online personas. And I think that is what we were just talking about, right? Is that they don't, that their life is online, but that online life is so disparate and there, and it's tiny sticks. It's not the big sticks of living life. And I don't know. I think there's something that I think is important about getting offline. So I know it's construction for her, but I also think there's a part of it that you just got to go out and do, right? And so part of that is letting things go and building other things up. Yeah.
That is absolutely the case. We just have to stay engaged.
And it's only going to get worse once AI enters into this picture, and my best friend can be an AI bot. I don't have to have a real world bot, and that bot is going to tell me how great I am all the time.
Sycophancy at its best.
I mean, it's kind of like having you as a friend. There you go. Almost as good. Like, you tell me how great I am all the time.
Again, sycophancy at its best. So I want to switch over to just saying thank you to people who are supporting us on Substack. We get some really interesting comments, and Mila Agias, if I'm pronouncing her name properly, is always just a big supporter with a comment or a thumbs up.
Yep.
And I just want to say a big shout out to her on Substack. So so thanks for that. And if you're not part of Substack, we encourage you to join our community there, because it's always get good articles going on.
Yeah, you get some great articles. You get a deeper insight into this. You get some additional pieces that we don't talk about here. And if you are a Substack subscriber already, thank you. You can upgrade to paid. That we'd be even more thankful for. More importantly, though, share that. Like, send that out. I think Substack has a thing where you can recommend that, please. It's a simple little thing. If you read and it comes in an email to you, you click on that and then you can just share, please. It's an easy couple steps, and that would go a long, long way to help us keep this growing and keep this moving, because we really want to continue to do this. And you can also join our Behavioral Grooves community on Facebook. You can leave us a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen. All of those things is, we talk about this every week in this, but they're important. And so I know people go, oh my gosh, I did that. I did that 3 years ago. Well, who are you today? Are you somebody today that's going to help us out? Like, who are you? Are you the type of person that wants to support this work that we're doing? Anyway.
Of course you are. Of course you're that person. You're part of a community that is supportive. And so we want to engage you in that. And so as you think about our conversation with Patricia, we hope that you can use some of those comments this week to go out and find your groove. And maybe a way to do that would be just to write a simple, honest sentence about who you think you are before you open that next app. Just one sentence.
Oh,
one sentence. Just write one sentence. Be the editor-in-chief of your own story. Just one sentence. That's my recommendation.
And use that to go out and find your groove this week.